is in that kind of...
Where we started, where we went.
I was born as a Finn in Germany, which is kind of a funny thing because I'm kind of between these poles.
Today the visit is at the studio of Marko Timlin.
Mm-hmm. I'm a sound artist, so I dedicate myself to building sound installations and to develop experimental sound machines that I perform live. Both my biological parents are deaf, so before coming here today and thinking about the interview, I thought that is actually a funny coincidence that I'm so fascinated by sounds, because if you think about the sound environment of hearing people is totally different than the sound environment of deaf people. And I grew up the first years of my life with deaf people, so in an environment.
In a very quiet environment.
No.
No?
It's very noisy because they don't hear it.
Oh.
They don't hear themselves.
Right, yeah.
But the interesting thing is that our reality, the reality of language that we have, is also a reality of information that we convey through language. Deaf people don't have that. They have it with
they use sign language.
Sign language, they have signs, they have also facial expressions that are very extreme. Like they can be very extreme. And to many people it seems also, I have heard that later on, for me because it was normal, very aggressive at times.
Uh-huh.
Because if they argue like physically, because
wow.
they can't talk. They can't, so it's
yeah.
like... And so the first years of my life, I grew up in a totally different sound environment than most people, I would say. And maybe, that is just a speculation, maybe that planted the seed inside of me that I'm interested in sound and the creation of sounds. And at some point in my life I realized, okay, I have a certain vision of sounds, and I have a certain vision of, for example, how to play and interact with machines. That became a big topic in my life, and still of course is, and it will be, I guess, my whole life.
Yeah, maybe it's good to mention that you are the partner of Anna Gutierska, who I just recently also got here on the podcast, and you are forming this sound art No, it's not collective. How is it like?
Well, we basically just founded together the
association.
Anitite and Seura,
Yeah.
Sound Art Society.
But let's get back to your beginnings. You said you grew up in Germany. What did you study? Like, you became a sound artist later, but how did you start?
I guess out of frustration. So when I was a teenager, I was struggling with society a lot. I saw all the hypocrisy, you know, all the lies, all the kind of middle class values that I couldn't share, you know. I would say I was 13, 14. I went to my parents and said, listen, I want to learn an instrument. And I wanted to learn the piano. And there was a family that my parents knew, and they had several sons, and one son was a very good pianist. And he would have been a good teacher for me, but he just left for Paris, where he started in the conservatory piano. So his brother was playing the drums. So I ended up taking lessons from the brother.
Piano, drums.
Playing the drums, and I loved it. I really loved it. It opened new doors, new dimensions. Starting in 2003, I discovered some fragments that were kind of missing in my life. So I was discovering literature, for myself. So I started to read a lot, and I got a lot of inspiration from literature because I was fascinated by the intellectual capabilities of these writers. It touched me somehow. It's like, how can you think so deeply? How can you kind of express things so precisely, so beautifully? And then 2003, I kind of switched from purely musical side to the kind of more artistic side. So I discovered Thomas Bernhard, who's a kind of an Austrian writer, and he has a fantastic way of writing. It's basically one book is one sentence. So I go back to Berlin, I go in the library in Friedrichshain, and they have one book of Thomas Bernhard, only one. And I take it, and it's called Der Untergeher, and it's a story about 3 pianists, and one of them is Glenn Gould. And Glenn Gould is considered maybe the most influential pianist of the 20th century. And that book started an explosion in my brain. And then I was cycling to Hermannplatz, and there was a second-hand record store. And I asked them, do you also have classical music? And they said, well, yeah, we have some CDs here. So they had 10 CDs. And one of these 10 CDs was Glenn Gould playing Goldberg Variations, recording from 1982. So I read the book, I discovered the CD, I listened to it, I immediately buy it, and that really changed my life.
I was checking here, by the way, that Thomas Bernhard was recommended also by Simo Saarikoski, who was my guest some time ago.
Really?
He also talked about Thomas Bernhard.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah.
So we have that link.
You have that link, yes.
Yeah. And then, it continued, and there was like Thomas Bernhard as an influence, there was Glenn Gould playing Goldberg Variations, then I discovered the writings of John Cage, and then the whole, my whole artistic work changed direction a little bit, which was hard, because before that I was making more like beat-based electronic music, and I was very successful. And of course, when you start to do arts, you realize that
it's much harder.
Yeah, it is much harder. It's tougher. There is so much less audience. There's so much less money. There's so much less interest. But I had to do it to kind of fill a gap that I had. And now I think a little bit, how could I combine this past that I have with the present? So that is something that keeps me a bit busy in my mind at the moment. I would say, I would maybe describe it like that. When I was like 18 or 19, I could already feel and hear what I am doing now, but at that time I didn't have the knowledge, I didn't have the experience, and technology was not where it is now. So one of the most beautiful, the most beautiful aspect for me doing arts is learning. I love to learn. I find it beautiful. It's so special what I do that it doesn't belong into any tradition or in any category. So every solution I find is always a self-found solution for a self-created question. So, because I have also studied music. I've studied jazz and pop drums at the Music University in Weimar, and then later have studied music technology at the Sibelius Academy. So I know how traditions work, and traditions are also a kind of a protection layer, because you can base everything you do, you can base on something. You can say, okay, if we think about classical music, the big references, Mozart did it like that, Beethoven did it like that, Bach did it like that, Schönberg did it like that, Stockhausen, Boulez, Xenakis, John Cage, Morten Feldman. So it's like you have these endless references, and people understand what you're talking about.
So would you say that it's important to have that base layer of the education? Of the
it depends on your personality, I would say. I cannot. One thing I don't do anymore at all is to generalize anything. Because life is so paradox. People are so paradox. The universe is a paradox.
What would you say to somebody what you do?
I would say it's extremely interdisciplinary because it involves so many aspects. So, of course, it always includes the aspect of sound.
Yeah.
So, how do I create a sound? That is. The second question is, for a live instrument, how can I play this? And that is not an easy question if you do not play an acoustic instrument.
Perhaps, yeah.
Because I realized at some point when I made electronic music in my studio, and in the year 2000, I published my first solo CD called Landing on Planet T, and it was kind of electronic music, club music, and then I wanted to play it live. And I made it alone in the studio with samplers, synthesizers, Atari computers. And then the question emerged, how can you perform electronic music, digital music in a meaningful way if you do not want to perform with a laptop?
And why didn't you want to perform with a laptop?
I guess for two reasons. The first reason is that I have witnessed so many boring laptop performances. And the second, maybe more important aspect is that I came from this experience. As a musician, a concert is a physical experience because your muscles create the music. I have a installation called Bits and Bytes, and it's 104 floppy disk drives. And each floppy disk drive is a voice of its own, so I can control each floppy disk drive individually. So I have a choir of 104 voices, mechanical voices. And the sound is produced only in physical reality. That is another aspect that interests me a lot. Like, the sound production does not happen in a computer or in an electronic instrument, but it happens in the real time. The mechanical movement of the floppy disk drives is creating the frequency that you hear. Imagine you have a huge hall, like a really huge hall, thousands of square meters, and you have a landscape there. And the whole landscape is just built out of floppy disk drives. Thousands of floppy disk drives, and you can walk through it. And imagine you're in a kind of a cave and tunnel structure that is just built out of floppy disk drives. And the sound can move like that, like away from you. Like, or can come towards you, or can move away from you, or can move from left to right, and you can have waves of sound. That is a huge project where I need a shitload of money, and that once I have that money, I do it, and I think it will be a live stream.
Do they even produce floppy disk sounds anymore?
I get all the floppy disks from waste disposal sites. I think they do not produce the old mechanical ones, but you can sometimes buy them online. So if somebody sells, for example, a bunch, because if you order one, it doesn't make sense because one costs you €5, but then the shipping costs you more than the floppy. So you have to find people who sell 10 or 16, and then it makes sense. So sometimes I order them, but mostly I go to waste disposal sites, which is a challenge. Because in Finland, the law is you are not allowed to take anything from the waste disposal site.
Really?
No.
Oh.
So once it is in a container, you're not allowed to take it, even if it has no value for them.
In the container that's on the street?
No, like...
Or when it goes to
the waste disposal sites where they collect the waste,
okay,
where people come with a car, and then they have wood, metal, batteries, oil, or old computers. But each time I go to a waste disposal site, I find old computers with floppy disk drives in it.
How did this fascination with floppy disk drives came to be? Like, why exactly the floppy disk drive?
Again, I would say there's a personal connection. The time I grew up in, the floppy disk drive was the heart and the soul and the brain of a computer. So the Atari computers, you couldn't store a program on an Atari computer. So what you did is you start the computer, then you load the program, and then you can work with the program, and all the data you load it on a floppy disk. Your composition or your sounds, you stored them on floppy disk drives. And the floppy disk drive has 1.44 megabyte storage, imagine. And we were able to make records with that. So
I was playing games on floppy disk drives. That were the first computer games I was playing were on floppy disks.
Yeah. So there's a personal connection, but again, it wasn't a conscious decision, it just happened. They sound really incredibly beautiful if you handle them well. It's a pleasant sound, and that is what surprises most people. So what I always do with technological objects like floppies or here the scanners is I'm interested in beauty. I'm interested in creating beauty out of something that people throw away. And they throw away the floppies not because they're broken.
Because they don't need them anymore.
They don't need them anymore. So what was once state of the art, it was absolute state of the art.
Yeah.
Within 20 years it has become problematic waste.
Yeah, you know, I have this thing with screens. Find some old screens from somebody who's giving them away on Tori or something. I have dug them also from like the trash and stuff, and then I take them apart, and then inside they have this beautiful piece. Like first they have this thick sheet of plexiglass that has these little white dots on it, and then they have these several sheets that are supposed to be dispersing the light or kind of making it even for it to be a screen, and those are so beautiful. That is actually just looking if anybody has old screens, let me know. If you don't need them, I can take them.
Yeah.
Or floppy disk drives for you.
Yeah, please let me know. Scanners, flatbed scanners or floppy disk drives, I even come to pick them up. Talking about screens and floppy disk drives, I just realized that a very important aspect for me is also the process of transformation. Because I think every meaningful artwork in some way or the other is transforming something into something else.
Agree.
And the more it transforms, the more interesting the artwork is to me. So that's why I have, for example, also a big passion for abstract art, because that's a higher level of transformation, and it gives me the chance to grow while spending time with the artwork, because it is abstract and it transforms something into something else. So this is a floppy disk drive like they are in the computer. So it is not a beautiful object. It's just a gray box.
Yeah.
So the first thing for me interesting happens when you kind of dismantle technical objects and you reveal their interior that usually is not visible. Many people have never seen the inside of a floppy disk drive, and then it looks like that. I mean, this is amazing. This is a beautiful object. Look at the mechanism here.
I have disassembled a camera in that sense, in that way, to check how it is inside.
So
yeah,
the first transformation is a visual transformation. So you transform this box into this, and then if you put that, for example, in an acoustic horn or on aluminium sheets, and then you have like 26 of them in a beautiful pattern, that's another transformation. The third transformation is this has been designed to store and read digital data. It's the only thing that has been designed for. It has not been designed to make sound or music or anything. So another transformation is to say, okay, I don't want to read or store data. I want to turn this into a beautiful sound source. And this is the read and write head of the floppy disk drive. So this is what I control. And this goes up and down in the audio frequency that you hear. So you can hear what you see, because the sound production happens through the mechanical motion of that part.
And floppy disks, and then you said scanners.
Yeah. So
What's with the scanners?
behind us is the scanner orchestra. And when I developed the scanner orchestra, I was thinking about amplifying the acoustic sounds of the scanners. How could I amplify the acoustic sounds of the scanners? Because I didn't want to use a microphone or a piezo microphone or a microphone picking up the sound, then it's electrically amplified and it goes out through a speaker. Because it's just not the same sound and it's not the same experience for the audience. So I started to study old gramophone techniques.
You made square gramophones?
No, but this is actually the same technique. So the gramophone cone we know is just like that, and then it opens more and more and more, and then it opens like that.
Yeah.
So that shape, every object that is shaped like that will amplify sound that is in the center, just because of the shape. And you don't know anything else. And with the scanners, there is one aspect that, of course, I don't have with the floppy disk drives, which is the neon light, the scan light, which goes on when the scanner plays and goes off when it doesn't play. So you can also paint with the movement of the neon lights in the space. So if you have two scanners and they play different frequencies, then the lamps move in different speeds and you can create these patterns. They are bigger objects and they have a longer range to go up and then to go down, because like the floppies, they only have 80 steps and they have much more steps.
You were living in Germany, I'm just completely off topic going now again. How did you decide to come to Finland then?
When I was a young boy, I visited my grandmother in Ylivieska quite often in summertime. And Karlsruhe is kind of a big city, and I grew up in a city, so I was kind of a city boy. But in Ylivieska, the farm of my grandmother was like paradise. So there was like the farm with the cows. There were my two wild cousins. Behind the house, there's the Kalajoki River with a rantasauna. So you can go to sauna and then jump directly in the river.
Fully, the ultimate Finnish experience.
Yeah. So Finland was kind of a paradise place for me. And my two Finnish cousins, they were always super competitive, Then the cousin from Germany comes, and then who's harder, and then we made this competition in the sauna. You know it, what the young boys do in the sauna.
I have no idea what young boys do in the sauna.
You sit there on the bench, and then you throw the water on the stove.
And how much you can last.
And the last one who goes out is the winner. So you sit here, and you know what the most painful thing is at some point? The ears.
The ears?
The ears will get super red and burning. And I had these earrings, and they would really burn, but I would be there I will show no weakness, I will not go out, I will not show the Finnish cousins that I'm weaker than they are. So it was this kind of funny thing, and then jumping off a cliff in a lake, and who jumps from higher. The Sibelius Academy, they have this music technology study program, and it was a chance to kind of complete the circle, go back to the roots. And I was, of course, interested. And I have to be honestly say that at that time, I also realized that I need a bit of lacking information, because I was just changing my whole practice and going more into kind of sound art and programming. I'm self-taught in programming, so I realized if I go to university, that might help. So 2005 I came to Finland to study music technology, and then I got stuck, so I'm still here now.
Interesting how the road leads you somewhere.
Yeah. When you say that it's interesting where the road leads you, I think the most interesting things happen when you actually allow the road to lead you, because not many people do that. Because most people want to be in control, they want to be in charge, and the more you are in control and the more you are in charge, the less the road can show you anything because you don't allow it, you don't open that gate, you know, that life can guide you. Some of the most beautiful experiences in my life, they happened when I really gave up control. I grew up without the internet. I grew up without smartphones. I have to say that reality in my youth was totally different than, it was really totally different than reality of youngsters nowadays is. And it seemed a bit friendlier. I find reality quite hard nowadays, harsh, like this competitive aspect that there is nowadays is something quite new. I mean, you know, you do something. Let's say I say, okay, I have a new project where I transform light into sound, which is this instrument that we see here. It transforms light into sound. So I played in darkness and I played only with light. And then you tell it to somebody and then immediately they say, you know, this Japanese guy who's in YouTube or in Instagram, do you know him? He's also doing this.
Yeah.
And I think for developing new ideas, if you get influenced at a very early stage, it's actually a big problem. Because
if you see that, oh, that's already done, it's very demotivating somehow.
Or it influences you in your decisions. Maybe you would have come up with a totally different solution at the end.
Yeah. True.
So, and in the past, before the internet, that was not possible. Not as easy as it is now. You didn't know what somebody is doing in Japan, not really. And that is also a good thing for developing your artistic language. I find that very important. I find it very important that you stop that information overkill, because if you're exposed to the information overkill as an artist, it is very, very difficult to find your true self, to find your language, however weird or strange or cryptic or not understandable it might be for other people.
But then we're kind of contributing to that at the moment with this podcast, and we're putting it out there so that somebody will see this episode and will get influenced by the work you do, and
or maybe not influenced but inspired. I think.
I mean, that's the goal. I really hope so.
Yeah. I don't, like I said earlier, the older I get, the less I judge, because I realize it makes no sense. You know, in a forest, the more different trees you have in a forest, the healthier the forest is.
Of course, yeah.
And the same thing applies to us as humans. Yeah. But I see this other kind of, the attempt, which I perceive as a very violent intrusion sometimes, to make things equal actually nowadays. More and more equal, because the more we are equal, the more we are a consumer mass that wants the same products, which means the better we are can be controlled, and the more we buy the same products that are produced from one company. I think inspiration is the thing that we all try to offer to visitors, the audience, or...
Where do you find yours?
I find mine in literature. I read all the time about whatever you can imagine. At the moment I read a book called The African Genesis, and it was published in 1961, and it tries to explain human behavior through animal behavior in a way that I have never read before like that. It's super interesting. I can't stop reading that book because it's like super interesting how animal societies are organized and what the most important instincts are. And then you look at human society and you see the parallels.
I mean, it's pretty logical that it would be like that. We're not that different.
Yeah, it's logical, but I think sometimes things are logical and sometimes we know things. But I think there's a difference between knowing something and understanding it And there's a difference between knowing something and experiencing that knowledge as a real experience.
Oh yeah.
Second inspiration is, of course, nature. And when I refer nature in that context, I do not refer only to nature on Earth. I mean, I do not only refer to an unspoiled forest or a shoreline or mountains, but I think the real, true, unspoiled nature is in the universe out there. That is also nature, because that is unspoiled, true, pure nature. Stars, planets, everything in motion all the time. Everything moves all the time. And even the universe itself is expanding. So nothing is static. Everything moves. That is such a beautiful thought. I think nature is for any creator the inspiration number one, because how can you create?
It's the ultimate creation.
Yeah, it is the ultimate creation, and it's like there's always forces at work that try to keep it into balance. Also, because the sun basically has two tendencies. One is to explode, and one is to implode. So one is gravity, which wants to kind of shrink it to a object of the highest possible density, and at the same time we have a nuclear fusion. It's like atomic bomb going on all the time that wants to go out. So it's like the sun is like that. It wants to explode, it wants to implode, and it is in that kind of shape, or kind of, it's in that state all the time. I find that absolutely fascinating. Yeah. But inspiration can be anything. I mean, I guess you have experienced it yourself. It can be a walk with a
different
friend.
things for different people. That's why I'm asking everybody.
Yeah.
I'm just curious to find out.
Well, okay, we said like literature, we said nature, and then I would say, of course, a third inspiration is if I have the honor and pleasure and occasion to experience artwork from another artist that really, really touches me and that I find really, really good. The last time it happened to me was, for example, last year in Berlin, there was this Märzmusik festival. It's a festival for contemporary music, for sound art. And the Japanese artist Ryoshi Ikeda, he had a performance called 100 Cymbals. And he made a performance with 100 cymbals, you know, the drum set cymbals. Like,
Yeah.
and it was a performance, and they performed the composition of him with the percussion ensemble of Strasbourg, which is the best percussion ensemble in Europe for contemporary music. So it was in a perfect acoustic environment. He has the best players he can get. The composition was beautiful, and the execution was perfect. And after that concert, I couldn't move. I was the last person to leave the venue because I couldn't move. I was just sitting there and enjoying the joy that I felt. He's very good, and you realize that it's a certain level of quality that I find very, very inspiring, you know, to reach that level. We are confronted with dark future for humanity, I would say. I think there is the chance that only some people will survive in the future, and these people will be the rich people, because they will have enough water and they will have enough security, and they will...
And bunkers.
Bunkers, and they're secluded. So how do you respond to that as an artist? And since I'm not a politician, I realized that I cannot respond in any activism, because that's just not my cup of tea. But I think what I try to do is to kind of confront this ugliness that we experience with beauty. So I just say, okay, there's this hopelessness and there's this ugliness, and I create beauty, and I want to create hope, and that's what I put there as a kind of a social dimension of my work, which I don't talk a lot about because I think it's a kind of it's a personal thing also that I also think that people are like often misusing it. You know, the label is more important than the work itself nowadays often, or the kind of the packaging, or like, and I totally disagree with that. For me, it's still the content that matters. Unfortunately, nowadays I have the feeling that the content is less important than the packaging, which is also to do with the media environment we live in. You know, like your website is for many people more important than the actual work.
Maybe because people consume the content so fast and they don't have time to go into it.
Yeah, but that is a contradiction. If you have no time and you want to experience art, then there's a contradiction. Because art demands that you invest some time, and you will only gain something meaningful if you invest that time. If you don't do it, you will just scratch the surface, and it's just, you know, many decisions are based on either how you can write about a work, which is not the work.
Yes.
You know, the way, I mean, it's a different skill. Some people have a skill that they can write about what they do in a very convincing way, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't say anything about the work itself. So that is a kind of a conflict I see nowadays in the art world, that decisions are based on the wrong aspects. Decisions are based on a video you make of something, a text you can write about something, but not about the work itself. And unfortunately, decision makers who are also part of this society, they often base their decision on that. And that I find a bit hard sometimes to cope with.
Yeah, I guess because art has always been a little bit subjective and kind of elusive to these criteria that they want to have in order to make some decision for whatever funding or exhibition or whatever. And maybe they're looking for these ways, like, okay, how can we make it, or that it's still about the art, but like so that we can measure it a bit better. Yeah, but it doesn't serve justice to the art itself, for sure.
Yeah, but this is something that really puzzles me, I have to say, and I think maybe that's also interesting to mention in the podcast, because maybe there's other people who feel the same, but that I find the decision making strange many times, because it is not based on the quality of the artwork. So what I don't understand, for example, is why do you say we can only fund a project that has not been realized? Why don't you say, hey, somebody with blood and sweat and suffering and maybe investing a lot of his own time and maybe a bit of money did something that is really meaningful, and we see the result, actually, you know.
Is it always like that? That it has to be a new work?
Yeah. So that's like, it's a super contradiction, because just because you can write a beautiful description of the artwork, still I don't know how it will be when you really do it. And it forces us to logify everything. I invented that term now, but to rationalize everything and logify everything, because we know that artistic art decisions are based on intuition most of the time, and that is the important thing, and that is why art is so important, and that is why art can be so visionary, because it is not based on all the parameters. Everything else is based all the time.
About the studio space, have you always had some sort of a studio?
I would say this is the most beautiful studio space I have ever had in my life, and that studio space is also the direct result of a personal decision that I made for myself. And I said, I spend more time in the studio than I spend at home. So it's the most important space that I have in my life. It's the source of everything. So I want now a studio space that is warm, dry, and I have daylight, and I have clean air. Of course, nowadays that I make big installations, space has become more important than in the past. For example, if you make electronic music with a laptop, a sampler, some synthesizers, you can do it even in a flat.
Yeah.
With headphones. Yeah. But I mean,
those are pretty large.
They are large, and then in this box are the floppy disks. And the beautiful thing about that space is also that I have now the possibility to make good videos of my works, because I can always empty that space and then arrange it so that I can film it. I'm surprised how quickly that went. Well, it's, 2 hours like that.
Well, thank you. Thank you a lot for being my guest and me being your guest in the studio in the same time. And,
thanks for having me.
And good luck with Sound Art Society.
Thank you. You will guess soon there will be the first announcements of events and performances.
All right.